Before we begin, take a deep breath and let your mind drift back thousands of years to a time when the Nile was young, when the gods still walked among men, and when one witness saw the rise of an empire that shaped the world. Welcome to this journey into ancient Egypt, a story told not from scrolls or temples, but through the eyes of a single man who lived every moment of it. If you enjoy stories that transport you, stories that make you forget the world around you, then make sure to subscribe and tap the bell, because this is just the beginning of a two-part epic. Find a quiet place, relax your shoulders, and let the desert winds guide your imagination. This is the rise of an eternal empire. Now let's begin. Before the first stone city rose from the desert, before kings claimed crowns, before history learned to write its own name, there was only the river. The Nile. It flowed like a silver thread through an endless sea of gold. No cities, no temples, no monuments. Only shifting sands, wind-carved cliffs, and a ribbon of water that carried life in its quiet current. Its voice was soft, so soft that only those willing to listen could hear it. A whisper, a promise, a pulse older than memory itself. For centuries, the river waited, patient, eternal, unchanging. Then they came, not kings, not builders, not priests, but wandering families, moving with the seasons, living from the land as lightly as birds tracing the sky. They followed the river because it offered what the desert refused: water, fish, shade, and the chance of life. Their shelters were made of reeds. Their tools were simple stone. Their fires glowed weak against the vast darkness of the desert nights. And yet, in their hands, the first sparks of civilization flickered. These early people watched the river carefully. They noticed its rhythm, how it rose, how it fell, how it left behind black, fertile soil. So they planted seeds in the mud. They waited. And for the first time in human memory, life grew from death, green shoots rising from a land once barren. The river had accepted them. Villages formed. Families stayed instead of wandering. Children were born whose first memory was not hunger, but abundance. People began to speak not only of survival, but of belonging. They read the sky the way others read the earth. They followed the stars to measure seasons. They counted moons. They learned that the world was not chaos. It had patterns, rules, order. Every hut, every harvest, every path traced along the riverbank was a quiet step towards something magnificent. They built simple canals to guide the floodwater. They stored grain in early granaries. They painted stories on pottery. They carved symbols into stone, symbols that would one day transform into writing. The Nile watched them grow, and they, without knowing it, were becoming Egyptians. Egypt did not begin as one kingdom. It was born in halves. To the south, Between cliffs and rocky mountains stretched Upper Egypt, a narrow strip of life pressed between desert walls. To the north, the river exploded into a vast delta, its waters splitting like fingers through rich green marshland. This was Lower Egypt. Different lands, different customs, different leaders. But they were tied by the same river. Some called him Menes, others called him Unifier, but all would one day know him as the man who forged Egypt into one. Through diplomacy, strategy, alliance, and, when needed, war, Narmer united the two lands, merging the red crown of the north and the white crown of the south into a single symbol, the double crown, the first true emblem of Egypt. And with unity, a civilization woke. Narmer chose the meeting point of the lands, where Upper Egypt's narrow valley opened into the delta to build something the world had never seen. A capital city, Memphis. A city of administration, trade, learning, temples, and people from every corner of the river valley. Here, scribes recorded the deeds of kings. Here, priests charted stars and measured the flood. Here, the first laws were shaped, the first royal tombs built. Memphis was more than a city. It was the heartbeat of a newborn nation. Families woke with the sun. Farmers plowed black soil with wooden tools. Women wove linen, ground grain, baked bread, brewed beer. Children played along the riverbank, learning from their parents the rhythm of agriculture and the stories of gods older than time. The people believed in Maat, the cosmic law of balance and harmony. Every action, offering, and ritual honored this principle. The earliest gods rose from nature itself, Ra from the sun, Geb from the earth, Nut from the sky, Happy from the Nile. Life was worship. Worship was survival. Survival was harmony. Temples began as simple shrines of wood and reed. But they quickly grew, stone by stone, into centers of knowledge, astronomy, medicine, and ritual. Priests became keepers of wisdom. Scribes, with ink made from soot and ochre, carved symbols, the earliest hieroglyphs that held prayers, laws, records, and histories. With writing, Egypt gained something no civilization before it ever had, memory that would outlive its people. Mud brick huts grew into organized towns. Mastaba tombs rose from the earth, flat-roofed monuments that honored the dead. Paintings and carvings preserved scenes of daily life, rituals, and beliefs. And then, a king named Djoser and his brilliant architect Imhotep built something impossible: the step pyramid of Saqqara, the first monumental stone structure in human history. A stairway for the king's soul, a declaration that Egypt now dreamed in stone, not mud. With this single act, Egypt stepped into immortality. Egypt was no longer a scattered river people. It was a kingdom, unified, ordered, and powerful. But unity was only the beginning. Now Egypt needed something greater, a vision. And that vision would come not from farmers or priests, but from kings who believed they were born between heaven and earth. When Narmer unified the lands, he created more than a state. He created a role the world had never seen before. Pharaoh, a ruler who was not merely a man, and not fully a god, but the sacred thread tying both together. His duty was not just to govern, but to maintain equilibrium in the universe itself, the delicate balance of Ma'at. His failure meant chaos. His success meant the world continued in order. Egyptians believed the pharaoh was chosen by the gods, his blood carrying divine resonance, his breath blessed by Ra, his authority protected by Horus. His life was ritual. His words were law. His death was only the beginning of his eternal reign beside the gods. A pharaoh's morning did not begin with sunlight. It began with purification. Before dawn, he bathed in sacred water. Perfumed oils rubbed across his skin, priests whispering hymns to Ra as the sky glowed faintly blue. Hymns rising with the morning air. Gold bracelets inlaid with turquoise and lapis lazuli adorned his arms. A wide collar of polished stones rested on his chest. A linen robe, light and perfectly pleated, wrapped around his body. Incense curled through the palace, carrying the sweet scent of myrrh and frankincense. Scribes knelt, waiting with clay tablets and papyrus scrolls, ready to record decrees that might shape the kingdom for generations. Advisors discussed harvests, trade from Nubia, the construction of temples, and the behavior of local governors. Every action of the king was deliberate, meant to reflect order, wisdom, and divine favor. Even meals were sacred. Bread made from fine flour, fish from the Nile, roasted fowl, dates, figs, grapes, and beer brewed thick and sweet. Nothing was ordinary in a king's life. Not breath, not food, not rest. While the pharaoh upheld divine order, the people upheld earthly life. Farmers plowed black soil with wooden plows, guided oxen, maintained canals, and harvested wheat and barley. Their sweat fed the entire kingdom. Women baked bread, brewed beer, wove linen cloth, raised children, managed homes, and kept shrines burning with incense. They were the unseen backbone of every household. Artisans, potters, painters, carpenters, goldsmiths, and sculptors. Their skill turned simple clay and stone into offerings worthy of gods. Scribes, the elite of the elite. Years of training, hands steady, minds sharp. They wielded the power of writing, the power to make memory eternal. Priests, astronomers, doctors, mathematicians, spiritual guides. They tended temples, studied the stars, and advised kings. Laborers, the builders of Egypt's greatness. They hauled stones, carved passages, built homes, temples, and early tombs. Their endurance shaped eternity. Egypt worked like a living organism, each person a vital piece of a grand design. Egyptians did not build temples merely to worship. They built them to connect, earth with sky, man with God, present with eternity. Early temples were simple: wooden beams, clay walls, reed roofs. But soon they grew. Stone replaced wood. Columns rose like forest trunks. Walls were carved with scenes of creation. the journey of the sun, the power of gods and kings. Temples became centers of knowledge, with rooms for astronomy, storerooms of offerings, libraries of scrolls, and sanctuaries where only priests could enter. Each temple was a universe in miniature, ordered according to the cosmic principles of Ma'at. To Egyptians, the world was not random. There was order, a harmony tying all existence together. That harmony was Ma'at. It was balance, justice, truth, cosmic stability. When the Nile rose at the right time, when floods brought fertile soil, when the harvest was abundant, when families lived in peace, Ma'at was strong. When drought struck, when hunger spread, when war raged, Ma'at was broken. The pharaoh's duty was to protect it. Every ritual he performed, every temple he built, every law he decreed was meant to keep the universe aligned. Egyptians did not obey their king out of fear, but because they believed he preserved existence itself. Mud brick homes lined the riverbanks. Huts clustered like small constellations on the sand. Painted pottery depicted daily life, hunting, fishing, harvesting, dancing. But beneath this simplicity, something extraordinary was forming. Then came King Djoser, and with him a genius, Imhotep, architect, priest, astronomer, physician, visionary. Imhotep imagined something no human had ever dared before, a monument that reached for the heavens, a structure that would stand for eternity, a tomb not of mud brick or wood, but of stone, layer upon layer, rising skyward like a frozen ladder to the gods. This vision became the Step Pyramid at Saqqara. It was the first of its kind, the first monumental stone building in human history, the first expression of Egypt's immortal ambition. And when the last stone was laid, Egypt knew its destiny: to carve eternity from the desert. The river had taught me to listen. It taught me when to plant, when to harvest, when to go to market, and when to stay home and weave baskets. But even the Nile could not prepare a man for the sound of stone being set against stone for the first time. When I was still young enough to run barefoot across the fields, I saw a change on the horizon. Smoke columns from new kilns, taller houses near the temple, and at the very center of them all, men who spoke with different tongues. Surveyors, master masons, men with ink-stained hands who measured angles by the stars. Djoser's name became a drumbeat through the villages. The king who will not be forgotten, the elders whispered. He will step himself into eternity. Imhotep's name came like a cool wind, a man of many faces, a physician who had mended lungs and bones, a scribe who could read the movements of the heavens, an architect who sketched dreams on clay. Where Imhotep walked, men followed, partly in devotion, partly in curiosity, and partly because the king promised grain, tools, and work in exchange for labor. I first met him at dawn, as I ferried a basket of reed mats toward Saqqara. He stood by the Nile, a thin figure against the red sunrise, holding a staff topped with a small carved representation of a falcon. Around him clustered men in stone dust robes. He watched the river like a man who could read its moods. "Child," a voice said beside me. A hand touched my shoulder. It belonged to the elder from my village, a man called Beckett. "This is no ordinary work," he warned. "They build for the king. They build for gods. If your hands are steady, you'll eat well. If not, you will learn the weight of the stones. I was chosen by chance, a cart stuck in the mud, a man called for help. I pulled. My strength was honest, and so they took me. They gave me a linen kilt, a bowl of barley porridge, and a place in a laborer's hut. My father kissed my forehead and said, "Listen to the stones, Aru. They will teach you how to keep your back straight and your heart patient." The quarry lay a day's journey from the Nile, across a stretch of stony desert where the sun hammered the earth. Granite, limestone, and the peculiar, softer limestone used for casing gleamed pale in the heat. Teams of men hammered at veins of lock. Others pried vast blocks free with copper tools, wooden levers, and ropes braided from palm fiber. The work began simply: cut, shape, haul. But the more I watched, the more I understood that this was not mere labor. It was an orchestration of crafts. Stonemasons measuring by eye, painters imagining scenes that would be carved long after they were gone, engineers planning ramps, priests chanting to bless the effort, and scribes tallying rations, days worked, and the number of hands needed for the next shift. We lived close to the site. The laborers' village smelled of wet clay, smoke, and sweat. At night, we slept beneath reed mats while the moon moved slowly across the sky. Men told stories to keep their spirits warm, tales of fields that yielded when a farmer sang to the soil, stories of lost brothers saved by last-minute sacrifice, old songs that spoke of a sky god's love and a river's fidelity. I learned to read the language of labor. A sharp whistle meant pull, a low hum meant lift, a shouted name meant keep your feet steady. And through it all, Imhotep moved like a conductor, quiet, purposeful, his eyes on the line where stone would meet stone. Imhotep taught us that stone was not simply material, it was language. Each angle, each face had meaning. The step pyramid would not merely be a tomb, it would be a cosmic ladder. Its form echoed the way the sun climbed the sky, tier on top of tier, so the king might climb after death as Ra climbed every dawn. On the days when he allowed us near the inner sanctum of the project, he would speak in low, careful phrases. "Measure twice," he said once, tapping a cord stretched taut between two posts. "The heavens do not forgive haste." He showed us how to align an axis by the morning star. He taught that a foundation must be patient, that the earth itself had to accept the weight slowly over days and months, so it would not shift and cast the king's eternity into ruin. There was ritual in every brick. Priests blessed the first stones with oils. Musicians played a low, repeating drum through the nights of heavy lifts. Offerings of bread and barley were laid beside the foundation, as if feeding a sleeping god. The work was prayer, the sweat an offering. In those years, I came to believe that stone itself listened. The height of the step pyramid did not come from brute force alone. A messenger with a reed scroll told us about celestial tables kept by priests who tracked the rising of Sirius and the cross patterns of Orion, a knowledge crucial to knowing when to expect the Nile that would feed the workmen and the crops. One night, beneath a sky so dark that the Milky Way seemed like a spilled river of light, I watched a group of priests measure. They aligned poles, chanted names that felt older than speech, and marked the ground with red ochre. "You see, Aru," whispered Beckett, his eyes bright in the moonlight. "The sky is a ledger. The gods write the seasons there. If Imhotep places stone by the sky's count, the king's house will be true." I stood there, humbled by the sense that our work was stitched into the fabric of the universe. My hands were rough, my nails split, but the stars made me feel as if I, too, were part of something not just grand, but sacred. Not all who came were strong. Not all wore iron wills. Some were artisans who spoke gently, with hands like birds, crafting tiny amulets of faience glazed in turquoise and azure. There was Hasey, a potter with a permanent grin, who could spin a perfect bowl with one hand while his child clung to his hip. There was Tapu, a mason, who liked to hum as he worked, whose laughter lifted the heaviest stones like whispers carrying flutes. We ate together in large communal halls, bread, fish, lentils, a bitter brew that tasted of grain but warmed the belly. Women came from the villages to make linen and to tend wounds, often reserving soft hands for the children and the elderly. Their quiet competence was the invisible backbone of the camp. Yet there were darker shadows too. Men stole in the night, disputes over rations flared into knives and then bitter remorse. Some came seeking fortunes and found only calluses and hard silence. Illness swept through in seasons when the Nile was weak, fevers that took a man in a week, leaving wives to weep and children to become orphans overnight. I saw cruelty, and I saw kindness in equal measure. I learned that empire is not only built by kings and architects, but also by the stubborn goodness of those who refuse to give up their share of humanity, even when the day's work has turned them to stone. No great project is untouched by doubt. Rumors circulated that the pyramid's height could not be held by the desert, that the transports from quarries were too ambitious, that the priests demanded more offerings than the granaries could spare. One evening, as a thin wind pushed sand like a tide across the camp, I overheard two overseers arguing. "If the stones shift, the king's soul will not find its stair," one said, his voice like grinding flint. "We cannot raise more than the land will bear." The other spat into the sand. "We will add more workers, we will add ramps, we will make the world bend to the king's will." Imhotep heard them and came then like a shadow. He did not shout. He spoke in the voice of a man who had seen both river and sickness and knew how time humbled all things. He said, "Stone remembers patience. We do not force the earth. We ask it to accept us." There was a silence, then grudging nods. The ramps were altered, the foundation widened, more offerings made. The work resumed with a new care, as if the pyramid itself had become a patient child we were all anxious to raise. When the first tier was complete, the priests convened a ceremony. The king came, robed in linen so fine it seemed to float. He walked between columns of workers, his eyes meeting ours only briefly, but in that glance there was something like blessing and also a distance I could not cross. The priests slashed goats, poured libations, and chanted. A small statue, carved precisely, with a face like polished stone, was carried to the site. Imhotep placed his hand upon it, and for a moment time seemed to bend. The scribe etched marks on a tablet, an ox lowed in the pen, a child dropped his pot and laughed as if startled. We returned to our labor with renewed urgency. Men who were slow found new energy. Corals seemed to dissolve in the wake of smoke and prayer. Even the sand seemed to shift differently under our feet. I, Aru, felt that in the hollow of my chest, something had changed. I had been a farmer's son. Now I felt like a small but steady part of a covenant, between earth and man, between labor and legacy. One night, as I lay awake, the moon a thin coin high above, I wandered to the workers' hut where Hesi sat, shaping small figurines by lamplight. The step pyramid stood behind us like a silent guardian, but Egypt was already hungry for more. The king had climbed his stone ladder into eternity, and the priests said he now sailed with Ra across the sky. Yet on earth, the world did not slow. A new dynasty rose, new ambitions stirred, and the desert waited for another giant. I was no longer the barefoot boy who had carried reed mats across Saqqara. I was now a seasoned laborer, a quarryman, and one of Imhotep's quiet watchers. Men who learned by observing how stone behaved, how ground shifted, how ramps carried weight, and how the wind carved the sand around unfinished monuments. My hands were thick with calluses, my back had bowed slightly from years of hauling limestone, but my spirit was stronger than it had ever been. And Egypt was becoming unstoppable. By the time Huni, last king of the third dynasty, passed to the afterlife, whispers swept like desert wind. A prince rises in Memphis. He dreams bigger than Djoser. His name is Khufu. Khufu, son of Sneferu, grandson of Huni, was no gentle king like his father. He was fire where Sneferu had been water. Ambition burned in him, and he hid it poorly. Sneferu had built pyramids too, beautiful ones, but none eclipsed the glory of Djoser. Sneferu had brought prosperity, imported cedar wood from Lebanon, expanded trade routes, and calmed the borders with diplomacy. Khufu admired his father's accomplishments, but admiration is rarely enough for a king. Khufu wanted more. He wanted a monument so massive, so perfect, that it would pierce the horizon and defy mortality itself. He wanted the world to remember one name, his. I was summoned back to the royal quarry at Tura, where the finest white limestone lay like sleeping giants beneath the cliff walls. Men remembered me from Saqqara. They greeted me with rough laughter, slaps on the back, and stories of sons born and wives lost. The overseer, Mary Atom, pulled me aside. "Aru," he said, "the king needs men who know stone, men who don't crack under the sun. We are building something new, something enormous." I raised an eyebrow. "For the king?" He answered, "For the future." Then he lowered his voice. "We're carving mountains." I had no idea then that he spoke literally. Khufu visited the quarry at dawn. He arrived on a golden barge with 2 falcon statues at the stern, flanked by guards wearing copper swords polished so brightly I could see my reflection in them. He stepped onto the shore with the poise of a man who already imagined gods bowing to him. He examined the limestone blocks with a critical eye. His voice was deep, carrying across the quarry like rolling thunder. "These stones," he said, touching a block with his fingertips, "will become the bones of eternity." Then his gaze swept across us, hundreds of laborers, masons, engineers, and scribes. He continued, "I do not build for myself. I build for Egypt." Those words thrilled some, terrified others, moved all. Khufu was a man who believed destiny bent to his will, and he meant to prove it. We traveled to the place he selected, a broad plateau overlooking the Nile. Wind scoured the sand clean there. The rock foundation was solid, unshakable. From its height, one could see for miles. It was as if the land had waited for a monument. The priests called it Achet Khufu, the horizon of Khufu. Surveyors stretched cords across the plateau, aligning the corners of an invisible square with the stars. Scribes recorded measurements, priests chanted to Thoth for precision. I stood beside Beckett,
now much older, his hair white as river foam. He whispered, "This ground is sacred. Mark my words, Aru. This king will build something the world has never seen." I believed him, but even then, we could not imagine the scale. No one could. The village that had formed around Saqqara was nothing compared to the one rising near Giza. It became a city, complete with bakeries, breweries, workshops, temples, medical huts, and barracks. Tens of thousands came, laborers, artisans, farmers during off-season, priests to bless the stones, architects to plan the impossible, scribes to record every block. Egypt was not built by slaves. It was built by hands that believed they were part of something bigger. Men were paid in grain, beer, linen, and copper tools. Families came to live near the site so husbands and wives wouldn't be separated for months. Life thrived even as the pyramid shadow grew. Markets buzzed with gossip. Children ran through alleys with reed toys. Musicians played flutes carved from bird bone. The smell of bread mixed with the scent of stone dust. It was a living city, built for a dead king. The foundation took months. Ramps were carved. Limestone blocks were hauled on sledges greased with water and fat. Log rollers turned beneath them like the legs of great insects. The first layer alone required tens of thousands of stones, each heavier than 10 grown men. Every morning we pushed, lifted, sweated, bled. Every night we shared bread, drank beer, told stories. Hisi, the potter from Saqqara, joined us, now with 2 children clinging to his legs. Tapu's brother worked beside me, humming the same slow melody Tapu once hummed. I carried my memories with every block. The site rang with sound, hammer on chisel, stone sliding on wood, grunts and shouts, the rhythmic counting of overseers. And above it all, Khufu's dream grew. Once a month, Khufu visited the site for ritual inspection. He walked among the workers in silence, head high, hands clasped behind his back. Priests burned incense before him. Musicians played slow hymns. We paused our labor and bowed. One day, Khufu said, "When you lift these stones, you lift Egypt. When you sweat, Egypt breathes. When you carve, Egypt writes her name in the sky." Men cheered, women ululated, children clapped. Khufu had fire inside him, merciless at times, but undeniable. He demanded perfection, accepted no shortcuts, punished carelessness swiftly, but he rewarded loyalty, fed the workers well, trusted the engineers, and never doubted the monument. He was ruthless, but only because he believed he was crafting immortality. Years passed, seasons changed, floods came and went. The pyramid climbed higher. Each layer was smaller than the last, but required greater precision. We could no longer see the ground when working, only the sky. Sometimes during rest, I would lie on the slanted stones, watching birds circle above us, thinking about how the world might look when the pyramid was finished. Beckett grew old, his hair thinning, his hands trembling, but he refused to stop. He said, "My life began by the river. It will end here, under this king."
The Great Pyramid was no longer a dream. It was a living thing, breathing dust, swallowing labor, towering above the desert like a second sun frozen in mid-rise. But a monument that large does not rise without cost, and the weight of its shadow began to stretch far beyond stone. I, Aru, had given half my life to Khufu's mountain. I had grown from boy to man upon its steps. I had lost friends to its ramps, gained scars in its shadows, and learned that stone remembers everything, every triumph, every lie, every death. And as we carved the last chambers deep inside, I learned that the darkest secrets of Egypt did not live under the sand, they lived in the hearts of men. Inside the Great Pyramid, the world changed. No sunlight, no wind, only narrow corridors lit with flickering oil lamps and the sound of copper chisels tapping rhythmically like a heartbeat echoing through the stone. The king's chamber was to be the heart of the pyramid, Khufu's eternal throne. Massive granite blocks, each heavier than a herd of oxen, were dragged from Aswan, hundreds of miles south. How they carried such weight is still a mystery to many, but I saw it with my own eyes. Ramps built like rivers of mud brick, sledges pulled by dozens of men, engineers shouting orders like battlefield commanders, priests walking behind sprinkling water and oils, the ground shaking as if giants marched across the desert. When the granite beams were hoisted into place above the chamber, the air itself seemed to stop. Beckett, old but stubborn as ever, whispered beside me, "We are sealing time inside stone, Aru. This chamber will outlive empires." He was right. Every sound we made inside felt sacred. Every breath echoed. Every footstep sounded like it belonged to a god. And in that suffocating silence, I began to feel as though we were building not a tomb, but a memory carved for the universe. Khufu trusted no ordinary man with the inner passages. Only a chosen group entered the deepest sections. Architects, priests, master masons, and a few workers who had proven absolute loyalty. I was one of them. Behind the polished corridors lay unfinished rooms, hidden shafts, false passages meant to confuse thieves. Priests called them soul tunnels, channels through which the king's spirit would travel. But some whispered another theory in the dark. These walls hide truths the world must never know. Carvings covered some hidden chambers, not of kings or battles, but of stars, numbers, celestial paths. Priests traced the symbols and murmured, "The king rises as Orion. His soul must pass through the Duat. The pyramid is not a tomb, it is a machine of rebirth." Even then, I didn't fully understand, but the more I descended into the pyramid's belly, the more I felt watched, not by men, but by the dead. Outside, life grew uneasy. Khufu was admired, but also feared. He demanded more grain to feed workers, more men to haul stone, more gold for rituals, more offerings to the gods. Villages groaned under the weight of his demands. Some nobles murmured behind his back, "He builds for himself, not for Egypt. The people starve while he climbs to the sky. A king who wants to live forever forgets those still alive." Rumors reached the workers' village. Arguments erupted at night over fire pits. Some men wanted to desert. Others believed rebellion would bring curses. And behind all this, the high priests tightened their grip, whispering prophecies, interpreting omens, claiming the gods demanded even greater sacrifices. The air in Egypt grew tense, as if the whole nation held its breath. Tragedy returned to my life like a cruel friend. Beckett, my old mentor, my second father, fell during a night shift. The stone beneath his feet loosened after a small tremor, a rare but deadly shifting of desert bedrock. I watched him slip, watched him grasp the edge of a block, watched his fingers lose grip. He fell silently. No scream, only the soft thud of a body meeting sand far, far below. I ran down the ramp, heart tearing itself apart, and found him lying twisted under the moonlight. His eyes were open, but not afraid. Calm, accepting. He whispered when I knelt beside him, "We all build our own tomb, Aru. Mine happens to be a giant one." He died before dawn. We buried him near the workers' cemetery, among hundreds who gave their lives for the mountain. For days, my hands shook when I touched stone. The pyramid suddenly felt less like eternity and more like a grave for everyone I loved. When the last stone was set at the summit, priests blew horns across the plateau. Women cried in joy. Men cheered, raising their hands to the sky. Musicians played flutes and drums. The pyramid gleamed like a fallen star, its casing stones smooth and white, reflecting the sun until it blinded anyone who stared too long. Khufu stood before it, arms lifted, robes flowing in the desert wind. He proclaimed, "This is my name written in light." The priests declared him eternal. Scribes wrote that the gods themselves bowed to him. The people, exhausted but proud, believed Egypt had entered an age of divine greatness. But the work was not done. A new question whispered through the camp. What will follow this mountain? Khufu had built the impossible. Now he wanted something more. Khufu's son, Prince Khafre, rose to prominence. He was not his father, less fiery, more calculating, eyes always observing. He walked with me once by the quarry edge and said, "My father builds mountains. I will shape the desert itself." Soon after, workers were ordered to carve a massive lion's body from a single ridge of limestone, a beast with the face of a king. Some said Khufu himself. Some said Khafre. No one truly knew. The Sphinx rose slowly, eyes staring directly into the sunrise, as if guarding not the pyramid, but the future. Working on its paws, I felt a presence there, ancient, silent, watching. Men claimed it breathed at night. Children swore its eyes glowed. Priests left offerings at its feet. And I felt the desert shift beneath my soul. Something enormous was awakening in Egypt. Despite his achievement, Khufu grew darker with age. He trusted no one, punished workers harshly, demanded tribute from far-off nomes, closed temple granaries, executed rivals. One night, a guard came to our barracks and said, "Khufu wants only loyal hearts near him now. Choose your side wisely." Rumors claimed the king believed his spirit was already half divine, that he spoke with gods in dreams, that he feared death no longer, and enemies plotted against him everywhere. And then came the secret the priests hid. Khufu was dying. The king who built eternity could not escape the weight of time. His final command? Seal the pyramid, prepare the chamber, summon the chosen workers for one last task. I was among them. And what I witnessed inside those final days is a truth the world has never spoken aloud.
And so, as the sun sank behind the Great Pyramid and the desert wind brushed past us like a whisper carrying the names of the dead, I understood something I had never grasped before. These pyramids were not stones stacked toward the heavens. They were not silent tombs waiting for a king. They were Egypt's memory, the memory of thousands of eyes that watched, thousands of hands that labored, thousands of lives that ended before the dream was ever complete. I stood before the mountain we built. I, Eru, my friends, my teachers, and those who were no longer here. And inside me, a question began to strike like a chisel on granite. What happens when the last corridor is sealed? What changes when another king takes the throne? Because we all knew the truth. The completion of a great pyramid is never the end of a story. And the death of one king is only the beginning of another's ambitions. Now, with the Sphinx rising in silence, with priests whispering in shadowed halls, and with a new heir sharpening his destiny, I felt that everything I had lived so far was only the first door. And whatever waited behind it was larger, darker, and far more powerful than I had ever imagined. The journey is far from over. Part 2 awaits, where secrets buried beneath Giza begin to stir, where kings clash with fate, and where Egypt steps into an age that will reshape history itself.